There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. A Tuesday evening that feels like any other. A quiet hum of the refrigerator in the background. The soft glow of a street lamp painting a stripe across the living room floor. You don't recognize them as hinges upon which your entire future will swing. They feel mundane, forgettable, until years later you look back and see them for what they were. The precise instant the world tilted on its axis. For me, that moment smelled like the clean laundry scent of his hoodie, felt like the rhythmic, trusting weight of his body against mine, and sounded like the impossibly soft whisper of his breathing as he slept, completely undefended, in the harbor I had quietly, desperately, built for him. He was a ship, and I was the port he had drifted into, perhaps not by design, but by the undeniable pull of some invisible current. And I, the quiet observer, the cartographer of his moods and my own secret longings, was terrified that the morning tide would simply carry him away again. It had all started with the water, which seemed fitting. We met on the university swim team, two bodies among many, cutting through the chlorinated blue of the campus natatorium. I was a distance swimmer, built for endurance, for the long, meditative rhythm of 1,000 lonely laps. My world was the black line on the bottom of the pool, the steady metronome of my own heartbeat, the muffled roar of water in my ears. I found a kind of peace in that isolation, a place where the noisy chaos of the world was filtered out, leaving only the purity of effort and the burn in my muscles. I was a photographer, even then, though I didn't know it with any certainty. I collected moments, cataloging the way afternoon light fractured through the surface of the water, the exhaustion etched on a teammate's face, the quiet camaraderie of shared exhaustion on the pool deck. I observed. It was what I did best. Liam was the opposite. He was a sprinter, a creature of explosive power and blinding speed. He didn't endure the water. He attacked it, conquered it in a furious, churning spectacle of 50-second bursts. Where I was quiet and watchful, he was loud and vibrant, the gravitational center of our team. He laughed easily, a deep, rumbling sound that made you want to laugh with him, even if you hadn't heard the joke. His energy was a physical thing, a warm front that moved through a room and changed its climate. He was all bright surfaces and easy confidence, and from the very beginning, I found him utterly captivating. I would watch him from my lane, this force of nature, and feel a pang of something I couldn't name, a strange mix of admiration and a deep, resonant ache. It was the feeling of seeing a beautiful, distant star and knowing you could spend a lifetime just charting its light. Our friendship didn't ignite, it seeped. It was a slow, gradual process, built in the small, interstitial moments of a demanding athletic schedule. It was built in the shared silence of early morning practices, the steam rising from the pool into the cold, dark air. It was forged in the groans of exhaustion during dryland training and the shared victory of a post-meet pizza. He had a way of seeing past the quiet walls I built around myself. While others saw aloofness, he seemed to see a kind of stillness. He'd sit next to me on the bus to an away meet, not filling the silence with chatter, but simply sharing it, as if it were a comfortable, familiar room. He would ask about my photography, not just a polite, "How's it going?" but real questions. He wanted to see the prints, to know why I chose a certain angle, what I was trying to capture in the stark contrast of black and white. He listened, and in my life, that was a rare and precious commodity. I, in turn, learned to read the subtle language beneath his boisterous exterior. I saw the flicker of anxiety in his eyes before a big race, the slight slump in his shoulders when a practice had gone poorly, the way he'd run a hand through his damp hair when he was thinking, a gesture of unconscious frustration or deep concentration. I learned that his confidence was not a suit of armor, but a well-worn coat he put on every day, and sometimes the buttons were strained. He was with Sarah then, his high school sweetheart who had followed him to college. She was nice enough, pretty and smart, and they looked like the perfect couple, the kind you saw in university brochures. They were a match set. And I, his quiet, observant friend, felt like a shadow in the corner of their sun-drenched photograph, happy for him, of course, but also harboring a secret, impossible hope that I kept locked away in the most fortified chamber of my heart. Loving him felt like a form of breathing, an involuntary act I had no control over. It was just a fact of my existence, like the color of my eyes or the beat of my heart. I never planned to do anything about it. The friendship was too valuable, too essential. It was a delicate ecosystem, and my feelings were a foreign species that could destroy it all. So I became a master of suppression, a curator of a vast, internal museum of unspoken affections. The shift, when it came, was not a gentle tremor but a seismic event. It was the winter of our junior year. The news of his breakup with Sarah didn't come from him directly, not at first. It came through the team grapevine, a series of whispers and concerned glances. "Did you hear about Liam and Sarah?" someone would ask, and the conversation would drop to a murmur. I saw him at practice, going through the motions, his powerful form cutting through the water with a kind of desperate fury, as if he were trying to outswim the pain. But on the deck, the light had gone out of him. The easy laughter was gone, replaced by a tight, forced smile. The warm front of his presence had been replaced by a low-pressure system, heavy and gray. He was a house with all the lights turned off. He finally told me about it a week later. We were at our usual spot, a worn-out diner halfway between campus and our off-campus apartments. He just stirred his coffee, watching the spoon create a vortex in the black liquid. His voice, when he finally spoke, was hollowed out, a mere echo of its usual confident timbre. "She ended it," he said, not looking at me. "Said she feels like we've grown into different people. That we want different things." He let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. "I don't even know what I want. How am I supposed to know if it's different from what she wants?" I didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. I just sat there, a silent anchor in his storm, and let him talk. He spoke for over an hour, a torrent of confusion, hurt, and anger. He talked about their shared history, the future he had mapped out in his head, a future that had just been erased. He felt unmoored, adrift in an ocean he didn't recognize. And for the first time, I saw the profound loneliness he kept hidden beneath his sunny exterior. I was his friend, and my heart broke for him. But beneath the sympathy, a treacherous, selfish seed of hope began to germinate in the dark soil of my own loneliness. It was a vile and beautiful thing, and I was deeply ashamed of it. I just wanted to make the pain go away, to somehow absorb it myself, so he wouldn't have to carry it. I wanted to be the safe harbor he so clearly needed. That night was the beginning of the ritual. He called me around 11, his voice thick with a weariness that went bone deep. "Hey," he mumbled. "You up?" I was, of course. I was always up, editing photos, the glow of my monitor a solitary beacon in the darkness. "Yeah, what's up?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual, as if my heart hadn't just performed a frantic, percussive solo against my ribs. There was a pause. Can I come over? I can't stand being in my apartment right now. It's too quiet." The silence in his apartment was an accusation, a testament to an absence. My apartment, which was always quiet, was apparently a different kind of quiet. A safe quiet. "Of course," I said, the words coming out faster than I intended. Doors unlocked. He arrived 10 minutes later, looking like a ghost. He was wearing an old, faded university sweatshirt and gray sweatpants, his usual vibrant energy completely depleted. He didn't say much, just collapsed onto my sofa, pulling a throw blanket over himself. I made him a cup of tea, which he held in his hands for warmth, but didn't drink. I put on a movie, something mindless and familiar we'd seen a dozen times before. We didn't talk about Sarah, or the breakup, or anything of consequence. We just sat in the flickering blue light of the television, 2 feet of space between us on the worn corduroy cushions. After about an hour, his head began to nod. His exhaustion was a tangible thing, a heavy cloak he couldn't shrug off. His head listed to the side, once, twice, before finally coming to rest on my shoulder. My entire body went rigid. Every nerve ending fired at once. I could feel the texture of his sweatshirt against my neck, the warmth of him seeping through my t-shirt, the soft puff of his breath against my skin. It was the most terrifying and exhilarating moment of my life. I sat there, completely still, for what felt like an eternity, my own breathing shallow and cautious, afraid that the slightest movement would wake him, would shatter the fragile truce of this moment. He was seeking comfort, nothing more. He was my friend in pain, and I was a safe place to land. I repeated this to myself like a mantra, a desperate attempt to quell the riot that had broken out in my chest. But it was useless. Every rational thought was drowned out by the overwhelming, undeniable fact of his head on my shoulder, of his trust, of his proximity. He had closed the door on the world and, without realizing it, had opened a door into mine. That night, he slept for hours, a dead weight of grief and exhaustion against me, and I did not move a single inch. I just sat in the dark, guarding his sleep, and wondered how I was going to survive. That first night established the blueprint for what our evenings would become. It wasn't every night, not at first. It started as a once-a-week occurrence, usually after a particularly grueling practice or on a Sunday evening when the loneliness of a coming week seemed to press in on him the most. The pretense was always the same: a movie, a video game, studying for an exam. He'd show up at my door, a silent question in his eyes, and I would always let him in. The 2 feet of space on the couch between us began to shrink, an erosion of boundaries so gradual it was almost imperceptible. First, it was just his shoulder against mine. Then, his leg would be pressed against my own. He was a creature of casual touch, something I had always envied and admired. But now it was directed at me with a new and unsettling intensity. I became a scholar of his physical language, a dedicated student of proximity. I could have written a dissertation on the subtle difference in pressure between friendly contact and something more, something meatier. The ritual evolved. The head on the shoulder became the default. He would settle onto the couch, and within minutes, as if pulled by a gravitational force he was unaware of, he would lean against me, his breathing evening out into the slow, deep rhythm of sleep. I learned to live in a state of suspended animation. My left arm would go numb, pins and needles tracing fiery paths along my skin, but I wouldn't dare move it. I would need to use the bathroom, or my throat would be parched, but I would remain a statue, a living monument to his need for rest. My apartment became his sanctuary, and I, its silent, watchful keeper. My own needs became secondary, eclipsed entirely by the profound, terrifying privilege of being his place of comfort. I was living in a state of high alert, my senses dialed up to their maximum sensitivity. I was aware of everything. The faint, clean scent of his shampoo, the soft friction of his stubble against the fabric of my shirt, the way his chest would rise and fall in a rhythm that I tried, unconsciously, to match with my own. I photographed him in my mind. I framed the image of his hand, resting limply on the cushion between us, the fingers slightly curled, the knuckles strong and defined from years of pulling his body through water. I saw a portrait in the way the lamplight carved his profile out of the darkness, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw and the surprisingly long, dark lashes resting against his cheek. These were images I could never capture with my camera. They were too intimate, too fragile. They existed only for me, stored in the private gallery of my memory, each one a testament to this strange, beautiful, and agonizing period of our lives. I was documenting the slow, tectonic shift in the landscape of our friendship, and I was the only one who knew the ground was moving. The plausible deniability of it all was my torment and my shield. He was exhausted. He was grieving. He was stressed from school and swimming. He wasn't thinking, he was just doing. He was a physical person seeking physical comfort in a way he probably would have with any close friend. This was the narrative I constructed, the story I told myself to keep from going insane. If I let myself believe it was anything more, I would be lost. The hope would become too great, the potential for devastation too absolute. So I clung to the idea that this was platonic, a temporary arrangement born of necessity. But my body, my traitorous heart, knew otherwise. It knew that the careful, almost deliberate way he would settle against me felt different from a casual, accidental touch. It knew that the small, contented sigh he would release just as he drifted off to sleep was a sound that resonated in a place deep inside me, a place I kept hidden from everyone, including myself. The couch was our island, a self-contained world governed by its own set of unspoken rules. But one night, the geography shifted. We had a brutal mid-season meet, followed by a long, exhausting bus ride home. Liam had underperformed in his main event, and the frustration was rolling off him in palpable waves. He didn't even bother with the pretense of a movie that night. He just walked into my apartment, threw his bag on the floor, and looked at me with an expression of such profound weariness that it stole the air from my lungs. "Leo," he said, his voice rough. "I'm so tired." It was a simple statement, but it held the weight of the entire world. "I know," I said softly. He looked from the couch to my bedroom door, which was, as always, slightly ajar. I had a queen-sized bed, a luxury I had afforded myself because I valued my sleep. His own apartment, which he shared with another teammate, had a notoriously uncomfortable twin bed. The unspoken question hung in the air between us, thick and heavy. He was asking for more than the couch. He was asking to cross a threshold. My mind raced, a frantic scramble of pros and cons, of fear and desire. This was different. The couch had a public quality to it, even in the privacy of my apartment. A bed. A bed was a sanctuary within a sanctuary. It was a place of profound intimacy, a space freighted with meaning. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at me to say no, to gently redirect him back to the familiar territory of the sofa. It was the safe move, the one that would maintain the delicate, fragile balance we had established. But then I looked at his face, at the deep, dark circles under his eyes, at the tension pulling at the corners of his mouth. He looked broken, and my desire to protect myself was overwhelmed by my desire to protect him. I wanted to give him a place where he could be completely undefended, where he could truly rest and heal. "You can take the bed," I said, my voice betraying none of the turmoil inside me. "I'll be fine on the couch." He shook his head, a small, tired motion. "No, man, I can't kick you out of your own bed." He hesitated, running a hand over his face. It's big enough, right?" The world stopped. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic, my own heartbeat, it all ceased. "It's big enough." 3 simple words that carried the force of a tidal wave. He wasn't asking to take my bed. He was asking to share it. The plausible deniability was wearing thin, becoming translucent. This was a deliberate choice, a conscious step into a new, uncharted territory. I could feel the map of our friendship being redrawn in real time. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "Yeah," I managed to say. "It's big enough." That night was the first of many. The ritual of the couch was transplanted to the more intimate soil of my bedroom. We developed a new routine. We would lie on our backs, a foot of neutral territory between us, staring up at the ceiling. The conversation was always sparse, murmurs in the dark about practice, or school, or nothing at all. But the silence was different in here. It was denser, more charged. Every shift of weight on the mattress, every breath, was amplified. I was intensely aware of him, of his physical presence in this most private of spaces. I would lie perfectly still, my muscles coiled with a tension that was equal parts anxiety and longing, and I would wait. And eventually, in the deep quiet of the night, it would happen. He would shift, rolling onto his side, and the space between us would collapse. Sometimes he would just press his back against mine, a long line of solid, reassuring warmth. Other nights, he would go further, draping an arm over my waist, pulling me back against his chest until my head was tucked under his chin. His legs would tangle with mine, a casual, sleepy embrace that felt anything but casual to me. The first time he did it, I thought I might actually stop breathing. His heart beat a slow, steady rhythm against my spine, a drumbeat I could feel in my own bones. I was enveloped by him, by his scent, by his warmth, by his unmistakable and terrifying need. I never knew if he was truly asleep when he did this, or if he was hovering in that liminal state between waking and dreaming. I never asked. I was too afraid of the answer. To acknowledge it would be to force a definition onto something that was beautiful and fragile in its ambiguity. So I played my part. I feigned sleep, slowing my breathing to match his, relaxing my body into his hold as if it were the most natural thing in the world. But inside, I was wide awake, every cell in my body humming with a silent, secret joy. I was holding the thing I wanted most in the world, and all I had to do was pretend I didn't know it. This was our new normal, a nightly exercise in unspoken intimacy, a dance on the razor's edge of friendship and something more. And every morning, we would wake up, untangle ourselves without a word, and pretend that nothing had happened, that we were just two friends, one of whom just happened to sleep better when he was holding the other. It was a beautiful, elaborate, and utterly unsustainable lie. The breaking point came on a rainy Wednesday in late February. The world outside was a wash of gray, the sound of rain a constant, soothing drumbeat against my window pane. We were deep in the throes of midterms, and the combined pressure of academics and athletics had worn us both down to a raw, frayed edge. Liam had been at my apartment since late afternoon, ostensibly to study for a computer science exam we both had the next day. But no studying was getting done. The textbooks lay open on the coffee table, untouched. We had ordered a pizza we barely ate. The energy in the room was thick with a tension that had nothing to do with exams. It was a low hum of exhaustion, of unspoken feelings, of a ritual that had become so ingrained it felt more necessary than air. We ended up in my room earlier than usual, the pretense of doing anything else completely abandoned. The rain intensified, lashing against the glass. We lay in our usual positions, on our backs, staring at the ceiling, the familiar gulf of mattress between us. But tonight, the silence wasn't comfortable. It was taut, stretched thin, like a wire about to snap. I could feel his restlessness, a nervous energy radiating from him that was different from his usual post-exhaustion stillness. He kept shifting his weight, the mattress creaking in protest. I traced the patterns of water on the window, watching them merge and race each other down the pane. My own heart was racing, keeping time with the frantic rhythm of the rain. I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and thrilling, that tonight was different. The unspoken rules that had governed our strange intimacy for months were about to be broken. The tide was coming in, and there was nowhere left to retreat. Finally, after an eternity of charged silence, he spoke. His voice was quiet, barely a whisper, almost lost in the sound of the storm. "Leo." "Yeah." I whispered back, my voice tight. He rolled onto his side to face me. In the dim light filtering in from the street, I could just make out his silhouette, the dark shape of his eyes fixed on me. I didn't move. I couldn't. I felt pinned by his gaze, by the sheer weight of the moment that was gathering around us. "I can't sleep," he said. It was such a simple, mundane statement, yet it felt like a confession. It was an admission that the ritual was failing, that the comfort he sought was no longer enough to quiet the things that were truly keeping him awake. "Me neither," I admitted, my own voice a ghost. He was quiet for another long moment. I could hear his breathing, a little too quick, a little too shallow. He was nervous. The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow. The confident, easygoing Liam, the one who moved through the world with such effortless grace, was nervous. With me, the thought was so staggering, so world-altering, that I almost couldn't process it. Then he closed the remaining distance between us. He didn't just drape an arm over me. He moved his entire body, pressing himself against my side, his face now only inches from mine. He propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at me. I could feel the warmth of his breath on my cheek. My own breath hitched in my throat. This was it. The culmination of months of silent yearning, of careful analysis, of hope so deeply buried, I had almost convinced myself it wasn't there. His eyes searched mine in the darkness, and I saw a universe of things I had never seen there before. Confusion, fear, and a raw, aching vulnerability that mirrored my own. The unknowing initiator was, at last, becoming aware of what he was initiating. The plausible deniability was gone, washed away by the rain and the intimacy of this final, irreversible proximity. "Would it be okay?" he began, his voice cracking on the last word, a sound of such profound fragility it broke my heart. He had to stop, to swallow, to gather himself before he could finish the sentence. Would it be okay if I kissed you? The question was not an act of aggression or conquest. It was a plea. It was a request for permission to cross the final frontier, an acknowledgement that he was standing on the threshold of my most heavily guarded territory and would not enter without an invitation. It was the most respectful, most terrifying, and most beautiful question anyone had ever asked me. In that moment, he saw me. He saw the walls I had built, and instead of trying to break them down, he was asking for the key. All the air left my body in a rush. The months of anxiety, of second-guessing, of living in a state of suspended hope, all of it coalesced into a single, crystalline moment of clarity. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by a feeling so vast and overwhelming it felt like flying. I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded. A small, almost imperceptible movement, but in the charged silence of the room, it felt like a shout. His relief was a palpable thing, a soft exhalation of breath that ghosted across my lips. He lowered his head slowly, tentatively, giving me every possible chance to turn away, to stop him. I didn't. I met him halfway, tilting my chin up, closing my eyes. His lips touched mine with a hesitant, questioning softness. It wasn't a kiss of passion or pin-up desire. It was a kiss of discovery. It was gentle and searching, a quiet conversation in a language we were both just learning to speak. It was the taste of rain and salt, and a loneliness so profound it could only be healed by another. It was a question, and my response, as I kissed him back, was the answer he had been waiting for, the answer I had been waiting my entire life to give. It was yes. The aftermath was not the explosion of relief and certainty I might have imagined. It was, instead, a profound and terrifying silence. The kiss ended as gently as it began. He pulled back, just an inch, his forehead resting against mine. We stayed like that for a long time, just breathing the same air, our eyes closed. The architecture of our relationship had been irrevocably altered. A wall had come down, a door had been opened, and neither of us knew what to do in this new, cavernous space we had created. I thought this would be the part where we talked, where the confessions would spill out, where the ambiguity would finally crystallize into something solid and defined. But he said nothing. After a few minutes that stretched into an eternity, he pulled away completely, rolling onto his back, returning to his side of the bed. The gulf between us felt wider and deeper than it ever had before. He had crossed the line, he had initiated the irreversible act, and then he had retreated, leaving me alone on the other side. The silence was no longer charged with unspoken longing. It was heavy with regret, with confusion, with a deafening awkwardness. I lay there, my heart a leaden weight in my chest, every nerve screaming. I had misinterpreted everything. The kiss wasn't a beginning, it was a mistake. A moment of weakness, of grief-fueled confusion on his part that he now profoundly regretted. The shame was a physical thing, a hot flush that spread from my chest to my face. I had been a fool, a willing participant in my own heartbreak. He fell asleep, or pretended to. His breathing evened out into a slow, rhythmic pattern that sounded utterly false to my ears. It was a performance of sleep, a desperate retreat into unconsciousness to avoid dealing with what had just happened. I, on the other hand, did not sleep at all. I lay awake for hours, staring into the darkness, the ghost of his kiss on my lips, a brand of my own foolishness. The rain stopped sometime before dawn, and the silence it left behind was even more absolute, more accusing. When the first gray light of morning began to filter into the room, I slipped out of bed, careful not to make a sound. I couldn't bear to be there when he woke up, to face the inevitable, awkward conversation where he would apologize and try to explain away the kiss, putting our friendship back into a box that I now knew would be a coffin. The next few days were a special kind of hell. He avoided me. It wasn't overt, but it was unmistakable. He was suddenly busy when I suggested grabbing lunch. He left practice early, mumbling an excuse about a study group. At my apartment, the ritual ceased to exist. The evenings were silent and empty, the couch a monument to a closeness we no longer had. The quiet that had once been my sanctuary now felt like a punishment, an echoing void where his presence used to be. The pain of it was a dull, constant ache, far worse than the anxious yearning that had preceded it. Before, I had hope, however fragile. Now, I had the bitter certainty of rejection. He had ventured into this new territory with me, and then, terrified by the landscape, he had fled, leaving me stranded. I let it go on for a week, nursing my wounded pride, telling myself it was better this way. I could rebuild my walls, fortify my defenses, and eventually, the memory of his head on my shoulder would fade. But it was a lie. The silence was eating me alive. The ambiguity had been agonizing, but this silent, certain rejection was unbearable. I had risked everything by nodding, by meeting him halfway, and he had simply walked away. The friendship, the precious, essential thing I had been so afraid of losing, was already lost. It had died in the silence of that rainy Wednesday night. And if it was already gone, then I had nothing left to lose by demanding to know why. I cornered him after practice. I waited until everyone else had cleared out of the locker room, until it was just the two of us, the smell of chlorine and the sound of dripping showers filling the empty space. He was packing his bag, his movements jerky and hurried, clearly trying to make a quick escape. "Liam," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, steady and firm. He froze, his back still to me. "Hey, Leo. Gotta run? I'm late for—" "Don't." I cut him off. "Don't do that. Don't run away." He slowly turned to face me. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at a point on the tiled floor just past my shoulder. The vibrant confidence that was so much a part of him was gone, replaced by a shame-faced misery that made him look younger, more fragile than I had ever seen him. "I need you to talk to me," I said, my voice softer now. "What happened? What are you thinking?" He shook his head, running a hand through his wet hair, the old gesture of frustration. "I don't know, man. I'm confused. The word felt like a slap. "You seemed pretty sure of what you wanted last Wednesday." The bitterness in my tone surprised even me. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were full of a desperate, panicked helplessness. "I know. I thought I was. But this is not me, Leo. This isn't who I am. I've always been with girls. With Sarah, the mention of her name was like a key turning in a lock, revealing the heart of his conflict. He was trying to fit his feelings for me into a blueprint of a life he had already designed, and they wouldn't fit. He was trying to reconcile his actions with his own self-perception, and the dissonance was tearing him apart. "So what was all that?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly despite my efforts to keep it steady. "The last few months. The couch. My bed. What was that? Was I just a convenient warm body? A placeholder until you felt better?" The accusation hung in the air, ugly and raw. "No," he said, the word exploding out of him with a force that echoed in the empty room. "God, no, Leo. It was never that. You have to believe me." He took a step closer, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You were the only one who saw that I wasn't okay. The only one who didn't try to fix it, who just sat with me. You're the only person who's ever really listened to me. I felt safe with you. I still do." His confession was both a bomb and a knife. He felt safe with me. It was what I had wanted more than anything. But it was also the justification for the pain he was now causing. "And the kiss?" I pressed, needing to hear it. "Was that just feeling safe, too?" He looked away again, his jaw tight. "I don't know what that was," he whispered. "It just happened. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. And that's what's scaring me. It felt right. It felt more right than anything has in a very long time. And that terrifies me, Leo, because I don't know what it means." And there it was. The truth. Not a rejection, but a confession of fear. He wasn't running from me. He was running from himself, from a feeling that threatened to upend his entire understanding of who he was. The anger and hurt inside me began to recede, replaced by a wave of profound, aching empathy. He was just as lost as I was. We were two people navigating a new, terrifying landscape without a map. He had been the one to lead us here, but he had no idea where to go next. I took a deep breath, the chlorinated air stinging my lungs. "Okay," I said quietly. "Okay, I get it. You're scared." I took another step toward him, closing the distance until we were standing only a foot apart. But you running away and pretending it didn't happen? That's not fair to me. I have been falling in love with you for 3 years, Liam. Silently, patiently, and for months, I have sat with you and held you while you slept and wondered if I was losing my mind. I respected your grief and I respected your confusion. But then you kissed me. You asked to kiss me. You crossed that line, and you can't just run back to the other side and pretend it's not there. It's there. And it's terrifying you, but your silence? Your silence is killing me, the dam broke. The misery on his face crumpled, and his eyes filled with tears. He didn't make a sound, just stood there as they spilled over and tracked through the faint stubble on his cheeks. A single, perfect tear hung from the edge of his jaw, and in another life, I would have reached out and photographed it. Instead, I just stood my ground and waited. I had laid all my cards on the table. The next move was his. He finally scrubbed a hand over his face, his shoulders slumping in defeat. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice thick. God, Leo, I am so sorry. I've been such a coward. I didn't want to lose you. You're my best friend. What if this ruins it? What if I'm just confused and I end up hurting you even more? You're already hurting me, I said, my voice gentle but firm. By not talking to me. By leaving me alone with all of this. I reached out, my hand hovering for a second before I rested it on his arm. His skin was cold. Liam, I don't have the answers. I don't know what this means for you, for your future, for who you thought you were. But I know this. What we have, what was happening in my apartment for the last few months. That was real. It wasn't just about you grieving Sarah. It was about us. And I'm not willing to let that go just because it's scary. He looked at my hand on his arm, and then up at my face. The fear was still in his eyes, but now there was something else mixed in with it. A glimmer of hope. A flicker of the determination I knew so well from the pool. What do we do? He asked, his voice barely audible. It was the question of a man who was utterly lost, asking for directions. We stop running, I said. We figure it out. Together. Slowly. No pressure. No labels. We just stop pretending. We start talking. And maybe, I added, my own voice wavering for the first time, we start over. From that kiss. As the beginning of something, instead of the end of everything. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just looked at me, his gaze searching mine, as if trying to find the answers to all his unasked questions there. And then he nodded. A slow, deliberate movement. A choice. He covered my hand on his arm with his own, his fingers lacing through mine. His hand was so much bigger than mine, so much warmer now. It felt like coming home. Okay, he said. The word was quiet, but it was solid. It was a foundation. Okay, Leo. Together, the resolution wasn't a sudden, cinematic revelation. It was a slow, quiet dawn after a long, stormy night. We walked out of that locker room together, our hands still entwined, and it felt like the first honest step we had ever taken. There were no more pretenses, no more plausible deniability. The fear didn't vanish overnight, not for him, and not for me. It lingered like a morning mist, a faint coolness in the air. But now, we faced it together. The conversations that followed were halting and awkward at first. We were learning a new language, trying to find words for feelings that had lived in silence for so long. He talked about his confusion, his fear of judgment, his ingrained expectations for his own life. I talked about my years of quiet affection, my terror of losing our friendship, my own insecurities. We laid our vulnerabilities bare, creating a new space between us built on the bedrock of honesty. The ritual in my apartment returned, but it was different. It was intentional. When he came over now, it wasn't under the guise of watching a movie or studying. He came over to be with me. When he lay down in my bed, he didn't wait for the cover of feigned sleep to reach for me. He would turn to me in the dim light, his eyes open and clear, and he would open his arms. And I would go to him without hesitation. There was a quiet certainty in his touch now, a deliberate tenderness that spoke volumes. It was in the way his hand would find mine in the dark, his thumb stroking over my knuckles. It was in the way he would kiss my forehead before we fell asleep, a soft, reassuring pressure that said, I'm here. I'm not running. We were healing. I was healing from years of hiding a fundamental part of myself, from the lonely ache of unrequited love. He was healing from the whiplash of a broken heart and the disorienting discovery of a new one. We were two swimmers who had spent years in our own separate lanes, and now we were learning to navigate the same current, finding a new, shared rhythm. The quiet of my apartment was no longer a sanctuary for his grief, but a home for our shared peace. It was filled with a different kind of silence now, a comfortable, breathing silence that didn't need to be filled with noise. It was the silence of two people who understood each other without words, who could sit together for hours, him reading a coding manual, me editing photos, and feel completely, utterly connected. One Saturday morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. I opened my eyes to find Liam standing by the window, a mug in his hand, looking out at the street. The early morning sun slanted through the blinds, striping the room with gold. He was wearing a pair of my sweatpants and an old t-shirt, and he looked so completely at home, so perfectly in place, that it made my heart ache with a quiet, profound joy. He turned and saw that I was awake, and a slow, easy smile spread across his face. It was the smile I had fallen in love with all those years ago, but it was different now. It was for me. "Morning," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. "Morning," I replied, my own voice soft. He walked over to the bed and sat on the edge, handing me the second mug he'd been holding. The warmth seeped into my palms. He leaned down and kissed me, a slow, lazy morning kiss that tasted of coffee and certainty. There were no questions in it, no hesitation. It was just a fact. It was our fact. He leaned his forehead against mine, his eyes searching my face. "I'm not scared anymore," he said quietly. It wasn't a grand declaration, but it was everything. It was the final brick being laid in the new foundation we had been so carefully building. "Me neither," I said, and it was the truest thing I had ever spoken. We never did put a label on it, not for a long time. There was no need. We existed in the beautiful, honest space we had created, a space defined not by words, but by shared cups of coffee, by hands held in the dark, by the quiet understanding that passed between us in a single glance. He had drifted into my harbor by accident, a ship lost in a storm. But he had chosen to stay. He had chosen to drop anchor. And I, the quiet observer, had finally become part of the picture. We began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we'd learned to create together, a silence that was no longer about what was being held back, but about everything that no longer needed to be said.